Delighted to be joined right now by journalist and Labour Party activist Paul Mason as well. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Julia.
Good morning. Let's talk about what is going on in terms of these claims of election interference from Donald Trump's camp. They are now accusing the Labour Party, and particularly two of his Keir Starmer's most senior aides, you'll know them well, Morgan McSweeney, the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, the man who took over from Sue Gray after a bitter battle of wills between them, and also Matthew Doyle, the Prime Minister's Director of Communications, was also very senior in the Blair government as well. But they were accused of anti-American election interference as part of a far-left bid to put Kamala Harris in the White House. They both travelled to the Democratic National Convention over the summer. We know that 100 Labour staffers have volunteered to go and work on the Democrat campaign. Labour insists they haven't breached any electoral rules in America, although foreigners are not allowed to be involved or give money or any benefit in kind. They're not allowed to spend more than $1,000 on travel expenses, otherwise they are breaking the law. Do you think the law has been broken?
No, I don't. And I think the whole thing is a storm in a teacup stirred up by a desperate Trump campaign. I mean, the Labour Party that I'm part of is part of an international progressive movement. And I'm proud of the fact that probably more than 100 Labour Party activists are out there in Georgia and South Carolina right now trying to persuade voters to vote for Kamala Harris and not to vote for Donald Trump. And I think we should thank them if they indeed end up tipping the balance, if they can get...
You think 100 Labour Party activists going over to some swing states? I mean, I can't imagine most of the sort of people who would either want to or be able to do that, the sort of people who most of those swing voters would be thinking, yeah, you've really changed my mind.
Well, they might do. And remember, it's not just on the doorstep. Campaigning now is done through telephone calls, it's done through data, it's done, you can be sitting in the back room folding the leaflets and putting them into envelopes while Americans go out there on the doorstep. It's something that I don't know whether in your life, Julie, you've ever had the door knocked on you.
I've done the door knock. I've worked on an election campaign. People will be very surprised what campaign it is. It won't be what you've expected. But
in the 2017 general election, I did it with a load of East Europeans who are not UK citizens and weren't entitled to vote, but they felt that they wanted to make a difference because they worked in factories in Nottingham and felt that they should have a say. So it's kind of, the world is global and international, and we have an international workforce. Of course, there are rules, and I suspect that Labour people have thought very carefully about how to make sure that they obey those rules. But I think the principle is that progressive politics is an international movement, and we help each other. So I'm not. Well,
yeah, I mean, there've been long-term ties, and we know. I mean, Nigel Farage was on Mike Graham's show this morning, and he's headed off to support Donald Trump. Again, is it a question though whether it's election interference, whether it's illegal or not? And again, those questions are still to be answered. That actually it's just unwise for the Labour Party to organise this. We've seen that LinkedIn post from a senior figure in the Labour Party, or helping to organise this stuff. That actually, either Kamala Harris is way ahead, in which case you don't need to do it, or Donald Trump's way ahead, in which case that's a dumb thing to do, or it's too close to call, which it certainly was in August. I wouldn't say it's too close to call now. I think I would say the one campaign that's really desperate right now is the Kamala Harris campaign rather than Donald Trump's, seeing where the polls are moving. But in a close election, when you're talking about our biggest economic and military ally, and you're dealing with the possibility of Donald Trump being elected, a man famously not thick-skinned, and given that we've got a foreign secretary who's compared him to the Nazis and the Ku Klux Klan, maybe it's not a good idea to pick a side?
Oh, I think it is. I think the government isn't picking a side. The government, the Labour government's gone out of its way.
Governing party picked a side.
Well, it's also a party in UK civil society, and that has skin in the game of global politics. And so, you can't, once you get into power, you can't stop being a party of civil society and of the global community that we're part of. And I think it would be unwise for the British government, to start interfering in the US election. Absolutely. But it's done the opposite. If you think about it, David Lammy's gone out of his way to try and engage with members of the Trump team. He's gone out...
Gone out of his way. He's done the bare basics of his job after insulting the then, as he was then, the president of our biggest ally country?
Well, I think whether if the president was insulted, he should stop his dalliance with fascism, because that's what he's
but this is a nonsense. I'm no fan of Donald Trump, but you can criticise Donald Trump for the stuff he says and what he does without comparing him to the Ku Klux Klan and to Hitler.
Well, so the Ku Klux Klan...
That's not grown up. That's student politics. That's not grown up politics.
The Ku Klux Klan organised racist marches and lynchings. And in 2016, when a bunch of people organised a racist march and it indeed attacked black people on the street of Charlottesville, Trump said that some of them were good people.
He didn't say that. That is, look, again, I'm no fan of Donald Trump. My audience will know this, but that's not what he said. He talked about the people who were at various... There's a much more extended quote, and that completely debunks that claim.
But let's be honest.
Let's do grown-up...
That in January 2020, he then lauded and incited people who were basically acting as a lynch mob and ended up...
I massively disapprove of his actions on that front, but does that make him like the Ku Klux Klan and like Hitler?
Compares him to the KKK, he's actually accurate. And I think I welcome the fact that we've now got, instead of a bunch of mealy-mouthed Tories in power, we've got a Labour government that is anti-racist and actually calls out racism and fascism when it sees it. That's why I campaign for them.
No, anti-race is obsessed with race, I would say. Can I ask you about the other big story today, front page, some of the papers today, and is about Commonwealth Heads of Government Summit, obviously in Samoa. Keir Starmer arrived yesterday, and it starts on Friday. And basically, a communique seen by the BBC suggests that actually heads of government, particularly led by Caribbean nations, are looking to defy the UK and basically put the issue of slavery reparations on the agenda, even though it's not on the agenda. And they're basically looking for, discussions, movement towards, this. We know perfectly well what it's about. It's about the British taxpayers paying a fortune in reparations to those who are the many, 2 centuries on descendants of slaves in Caribbean and elsewhere. Should we pay slavery reparations?
Well, can we agree that slavery was a bad thing?
I mean, seriously? Did you really ask that question?
Can we agree? Because some of your callers seem to be quite insouciant about it.
Some of my callers, we just heard Dan and Natasha. In what way did they in any way imply that they weren't bothered by slavery? Well, it was okay.
No, but
Has anyone ever answered your question saying, I think slavery was a good thing, we should bring it back, and nothing was done wrong to the Africans who were tents on slave ships?
There is a revisionist movement in British education to try and paper over slavery.
No,
there is.
I'm sorry. No, there's not no, there's a revisionist movement in schools right now in British education to actually try and paper over the real facts, which is that we stopped slavery. Have you got a kid at school? They're told every day how awful British people were in the past. That's literally all they're taught these days. No, it's not about awful British people. It's about the fact that our entire state and our entire system and the wealth of many existing families right now is fundamentally based on the theft of people's humanity. It's not. Daniel Hanna read a great piece on this the other day. It's based on capitalism.
So investment banks, various family funds exist that basically still have money in them that was accumulated in slavery.
Okay, well, if those...
if
the Caribbean nations want to take legal action through the civil courts against those corporations, that's between those two organisations.
Absolutely.
I have no idea what your family past is, but I'm pretty darn sure, know that my parents were born into working class families, one from Ireland, one from Britain, that they weren't enjoying the riches that came along from slavery many centuries ago. They were working on farms, working in factories, working in mills, as most people listening to this show, paying taxes today, were doing. Why on earth should the British taxpayer at any point ever be forced to pay for the sins of people 200 plus years ago from which they have not benefited?
Well, let me tell you about my family history, because one side of my family were Lancashire cotton mill and mine workers. And as far back as I've been able to trace it, it's pretty obvious that they would have been aware of, or maybe even part of, the movement to abolish slavery, because the movement to abolish slavery was rooted in working class activity. Okay, so I don't speak with any more authority than you do about your ancestors, but I think, given that they were struggling against slavery at the time, as very poor and semi-literate people, I think they would be quite proud of our country if it did stump up some money
I think quite the opposite. They would say they've done their bit. Poor people, literally people living hand to mouth, working a 6-day week in really, really terrible conditions, still cared enough, because this is what this country is. This is what it tells you what this country is really like. Cared enough about people who'd been, you know, from a far-flung continent, taken to another far-flung continent.
They really cared, and they fought and they went to the streets.
Yes, they did. Why on earth is Britain uniquely responsible for this terrible
it's not
ill?
uniquely responsible. It's not
everyone who's white and European. Okay. Everyone.
Well, let's remember that the majority of black slaves who were brutally, you know, raped, beaten, etc., were taken to the Caribbean. Okay, there's a view that the majority were taken to America. They weren't.
And who sold? Can I clarify? Do you know who sold those people to the white slave traders? Because it was black Africans. Has anyone talked about reparations from the black Africans?
Absolutely. It's ridiculous.
What's ridiculous about that? The people who sell slaves are innocent. The people who buy slaves are bad.
Was British plantation capitalism. Okay, that's what it was.
Who sold the slaves to the white Europeans in the first place?
The motive force was white British people.
Who sold the slaves?
A lot of... Well,
who sold the slaves?
Black and Arab slave
so wait a minute. So aren't they ultimately responsible? They're the ones who rounded up their own people as if they were cattle and sold them as if they were cattle to whites.
Whose navy ruled the waves for 200 years.
Our fault.
And, well, look, it's not just
Wait a minute. You know what we did? We were in charge of the waves, and we spent the equivalent of billions of pounds in today's money ending the slave trade, and billions of pounds enforcing that end, and thousands of sailors' lives lost.
That's to be lauded, and we should remember that as well.
That's not enough, then.
I'm in favour of remembering both. But let's come back to this question of reparations. Slavery's impact didn't end when slavery was formally abolished.
There is nobody in the Caribbean today who is currently living a worse life now than they because of
Sorry, Julia, I would say that the entire region is living a worse life because of slavery. The psychological
200 years. 200 years.
Well, no, it's not just that, because the impact of the slave system, you know, it turned into a system of indentured labour, and over above any economic impact, it also left a legacy of structural racism. You know, I was watching an early James Bond movie, Dr. No, the other day, and you can see the way that even in the 60s, when I was a kid, that we saw the Caribbean, Jamaica, as this kind of playground for white people with some black people attached. Those legacy attitudes were around in my childhood. And of course, what happened to people from Jamaica and the Caribbean who came to Britain in the 50s, they were targeted by organised racists in Oswald Mosley's British movement, in the Notting Hill riots. So the legacy stays with us, doesn't it? It's not a 200-year-old problem.
And by the way, there has never been any racism whatsoever, ever, at any point in any society other than a white society. But it's a key point to remember that. But we could do this for ages. Unfortunately, do have to go to a break. I'm already way over time, but please come on and discuss this again. We didn't even get onto employment rights. I suppose you feel slow. I didn't answer that question about whether I thought slavery was a bad thing or not. I didn't feel it was necessary to answer that question. I'm pretty sure everyone knows the answer to that. Deep sighs.